Hello, today is Thursday, August 6th, 2020. My name is Jackie Pedota, and I'm here interviewing Genesis Zambrano for the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know that this interview will be placed in the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection at the University of Texas at Austin. If there is anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there's something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. Because we're not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting. So I'll ask you a series of 5 questions. Please say, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. There are 2 questions we need to make sure you agree to before we go on. Voces wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at the Benson Library at UT Austin. We will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to Voces. Do you give Voces consent to archive your interview and your materials at the Benson Library?
Yes, I agree.
Do you grant Voces copyright over the interview and any material you provide?
Yes, I agree.
Do you agree to allow us to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes, I agree.
We also have many questions in the pre-interview form that we already filled out. We use that information from the pre-interview form to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voces server, and before we send it to the Benson, we would have stripped out any contact information for yourself or family members, so that will not be part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Benson Library. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in your public file available to researchers at the Benson?
Yes, I agree.
On occasion, Voces receives requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give us consent for us to share your phone number or your email with journalists?
Yes, I agree.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Genesis, for bearing with me. I know it's long, and I know my voice sounds a little odd. I'm struggling with allergies since I moved back to Austin. It's the only place that really gives me allergies. So before we get started with specific questions, maybe you can just start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so like you said, my name is Genesis. I'm an elementary music teacher. So I'm teaching kindergarten through 5th grade general music. I've been in Miami since '94. So for the last 25 years of my life, I was originally born in Caracas, Venezuela. And my family, my mother was one of those, seeking better opportunities, seeking a different future for her kid. So she decided that this would be the place, and when you're in Venezuela, the US seems like the land of opportunity. So my mom wanted that for her, but I think mostly for me. And so, yeah, we've been here for 25 years now. I'm fortunate enough to have most of my family here, between here and Mexico, since the situation in Venezuela has gotten so complicated, politically and in terms of safety. And yes, I think that's a little quick tidbit about myself.
And so you talked about, most of your family being in Miami and in Mexico. And I'm interested in kind of hearing how has that transition been for them? And do you have any family still in Venezuela, especially kind of thinking about this time in particular? I would imagine it being very difficult.
Yeah, I still have my paternal grandparents in Venezuela. They really just didn't want to leave home. They felt more comfortable there despite the scarcity, despite the unsafety. they had grown up there, and so they decided that that's where they wanted to be. So they've been struggling to stay indoors, to find the medication they need, especially at their age. But luckily, the family that's here has been helping them out in terms of finances and in terms of finding those contacts to get them the help they need. My family in Mexico right now, they moved there a while back. I want to say maybe about a year ago. That transition has been challenging, but it's also very much improved their circumstances from where they were at in Venezuela, you know, in terms of finding work. Um, my one of my aunts had to deal with a very difficult situation where her husband was murdered in Venezuela. So she was one of those victims of the government's lack of governing, to put it in a certain way. But they've found a good place in Mexico with its challenges, but they've been fortunate. They're working. Their kids have been able to find a community there. Obviously now because of COVID, everything's, you know, happening from home, but it is an improvement on their situation. And while my family here, where it's pretty much my immediate family. It's my mom, my dad, my stepdad, and I have a couple of aunts and uncles in Orlando. And they're doing okay given the circumstances. Most of them have been able to continue working to some extent. I know that some family members of mine struggle with work because they're not documented. So that's a general struggle, and even more so given the COVID pandemic right now. But we're getting by.
Yeah, I'm sure that it is extremely challenging, and to elaborate a little bit more on something that you said is specifically for your family members that are undocumented. Have you seen any, or can you elaborate more on like any specifics that you think, specific struggles that have either been amplified or new struggles, you know, that have come about due to COVID, specifically as it relates to work?
Well, in terms of work, they have to work odd jobs, and those odd jobs, you know, that typically include housekeeping or you know, work around people's homes. Obviously, right now with a lot of people um, doing the responsible thing, which is to quarantine, they don't want strangers inside of their house. So the housekeeping jobs are gone. Um, some of my family members are DACA recipients, and the administration has been attacking that at full force. So they're also nervous. You know, the younger generation that has gotten the benefits of being able to work legally, they're concerned that that might not be the case for much longer.
And thinking about your other family members as well, I guess pre-COVID, because I know, especially when you have family in other locations, and if your, you know, family is relatively close, typically, you know, you travel to visit and connect with family members. Was that something that you all would do, you know, pre-COVID, obviously?
Yeah. Yeah, we were trying our best, especially with the family in Mexico, because we all know that just because we're all Hispanic doesn't mean that we necessarily feel like we fit in with Hispanic people from other countries. And so just trying to sort of soothe that feeling of not belonging, we really tried to visit our family in Mexico a lot. And obviously that's been rough because my mom was able to go see our family members over there. Really, I think it might have been February, like right before all of this broke out, and they started canceling flights and things like that. But since then, even amongst ourselves here, I went months without seeing my mom and my stepdad, and they live 30-40 minutes away because we really didn't want to risk it. My mom has a heart condition. So we've just all been very, very much abiding by the staying at home recommendation.
And how do you feel that, I guess, these changes in, the relationships that you have and your family has had, how has that, particularly impacted you personally, but then maybe how has it impacted your other family members, like your mom that you were mentioning?
Well, we're really tight knit. We're very, very, very tight knit. We always joke about the matriarch, right? Because it's my grandmother. She had 5 daughters, and then I was the firstborn of the grandchildren. And so luckily this day and age, we have the means to still keep in contact. I mean, we did the video conferencing as often as we could. We would find any excuse to get the entire family together on video conferencing, and that was a blast. Those calls would last hours and hours on end. But particularly for me and my mom, because it's very much been her and I for the longest time, it's been rough. It's been rough not being able to see each other every weekend.
And so, have you all tried to kind of engage in person? I know some people, based off of the CDC guidelines, if you wear a mask or if you're 6 feet apart, you can, facilitate some sort of in-person interaction. So have you all engaged in person in any sort of way?
Yeah, once we did those first 2 months of strict quarantine, we determined that it should be relatively safe if nobody was leaving their house, not even to do groceries or anything like that. We were getting those delivered. We were able to meet in the backyard where everybody could stay far apart. And yeah, so we've been able to see each other more often now than at the beginning. And that's been a breath of fresh air.
That's great to hear. So obviously it's a little bit of a different vibe, I'm sure. So can you kind of share more about kind of like how was that experience for you, kind of being in this new type of like social distance like familial connection?
So I'm laughing because the story I'm going to tell sounds like something out of a cartoon. The very first time that I went to visit my mom after the quarantine, I was very concerned, and I was very careful, and I was very much about, the 6 feet apart and personal space. And that woman has chased me around my car. She chased me around my car in the driveway because she wanted to hug me, and I had to run away from her. So luckily her stamina isn't what it used to be, but yeah, that I think that pretty much sums up my experience, because we're very physically affectionate. We're that family that hugs and sits on each other's laps, and just, people are walking by you and they give you a kiss in the forehead, and that's us. And so it's been weird to remember that we can't do that.
Yeah, I I can imagine. That's a pretty funny story. Thank you for sharing that story. And so you talked about I'm going to go back to something that you mentioned about, being in pretty strict quarantine, not even going out for groceries. So you said you got those delivered. Was there anything else in terms of kind of your routine, your daily routine that you had to change or eliminate, modify kind of for that really strict quarantine period that you had?
Well, the very first change was in my work, because they shut us. I'm a teacher. They shut schools down in March. I want to say it was second or third week of March, and so we had to work from home. So that was the first big change. Was, surprise, transferring your curriculum to online. We, for a while, we weren't able to go back in the building to get any resources, any books, things like that. So it was really just a scramble trying to sift through the millions and millions of website and resources and blogs and things like that online. So work, that was a bit of a culture shock trying to do that online. Our groceries were delivered. We really didn't leave the house unless strictly necessary. My significant other works from home, so we were fortunate in that sense that both of us were able to do the quarantine pretty strictly. The only times that we really left the house consistently were to walk our dog. And that was 30 minutes inside of the complex, away from the neighbors, very far away. Hello. And I'm trying to think, even when it wasn't groceries, like if we wanted to have, a taste of our favorite restaurant or things like that, we would order those too, just to feel a little bit of a sense of normalcy. And we're not good cooks. My significant other and I, we can't cook. It's like survival cooking. So yeah, we just did what we could to be responsible, but still try to get a little bit of what it was before quarantine.
Yeah, definitely. And you talked about in March kind of work transitioning to home and transitioning online. And you talked about, being a music teacher. So I'm interested in kind of hearing about, because it's a little bit different, right, than traditional kind of subject-based, academic-based instruction. So if you can kind of tell me a little bit about how that experience was kind of from beginning to now, because I'm sure you're planning on this upcoming academic year as well.
Yeah, it was definitely challenging at first because we were told on a Friday. I found out on a Friday at something like 5 o'clock because I had a group of kids working with me after school on the recorders. And, surprise, come Monday, you're teaching from home. And at first it was a learning curve. I mean, it's how do you transfer something that's so hands-on and so group oriented to an online platform that in terms of sound isn't equipped to handle more than one person making sound at a time. So at first it was a little frustrating because my kids, and I see it in their face, and I see it, when they hug me and things like that. They enjoy my class. They enjoy playing the instruments. They enjoy the singing and the games and things like that. And that's stuff that we weren't able to do. But eventually once okay, this is happening. We have to do it, put on our big girl pants. I realized that we were able to explore things that maybe we wouldn't have during the school year, if we had been in the building. So we got to delve into the music that they're listening to. We got to discuss different ways in which you can be part of the music making community. We got to research their favorite songs and who wrote them, and what these genres had in common, how they were different. We were able to write librettos. We came up with our own ideas for musicals, and the kids wrote their librettos and thought about their characters and things like that. And we were also able to explore electronic music making, which, you know, we all know that nowadays is very prominent in the industry, you know, and that's stuff that we generally don't do in my class because we really don't have access to computers. So that was nice. It was something that the kids really appreciated because it also, I think, made them feel more, I don't know if the word is connected. It was easier for them to relate, you know, to making music in a way that sounded like what they were listening to on the radio. And I think at the end of it, we made the most out of less than ideal circumstances, I think.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Like, especially the creating their own musical. Did they have fun doing that?
I'd like to think so. It's hard to get the feedback in real time the way you do when they're in front of you, because when they're in front of you, you feel it in the room. If they're having fun, there's a buzz. If they don't quite understand, they're not really into it, they're looking at you like, are we really doing this? But I think that for the most part they had fun. I had a lot of kids. It also, something that I noticed, because we had to use an online platform to turn in assignments as well, the kids actually got more involved in terms of communication and staying on top of their stuff. You know, I was getting messages because there was a chat option in the platform that we were using, and I had third, fourth, and fifth graders writing to me directly. You know, they weren't waiting on parents or aunts or uncles. They were the ones asking me, hey, I don't understand, or where can I find this, or is this a good idea, things like that. And it was that part I found really refreshing, that the kids were they had the tools to take responsibility for themselves, because you talk about, oh, email me, and the kids are looking at you like, what's that? But the chat option apparently came easier to them. So that was nice.
Yeah, that's super cool. I guess you talk a little bit about the the difference and kind of the ways in which you get feedback from the students. And then I know you mentioned the students that you work with are younger. And so have you seen any I guess other challenges in terms of transitioning online for the younger students? Because sometimes, like, the older students, not saying that it's always easy, but like the older students, right, sometimes have a little bit easier of a time with things like this.
Yeah. So my kindergartners through second grade, they obviously had a harder time because they have to depend very much so on their parents, and obviously their parents were working, or trying to find work, trying to make this work. You know, the fact that their kids are home, they can't be left alone. I had several students whose parents were essential workers. They were first responders. And so there was, I distinctly remember there was one child in particular who disappeared for a while, wasn't coming to the meetings, wasn't turning in their work. And so I sent a message to the parent, I think it was the mom. Hi, just reaching out because I haven't seen this your child in a while. Just wanted to double check if they needed any help. And that's when she told me that their father had contracted COVID because he was an EMT. And so that's one of those situations where, you know, it takes a lot of it really is understanding that we need to be, I guess the word is gracious, you know, in terms of how we communicate with parents and kids, and and B, just being there really to provide support and understand that at this point in time, the curriculum needs to come second. You know, any plans that you had for your test scores, for your performances, for your whatever the case may be, that needed to be put on the back burner to make sure that these kids and their families were okay.
Yeah. And I know those are things that obviously you can control in your classroom, but did you all receive any communication from like the school, the admin? Did you as other teachers talk about additional like policies or procedures that can be put or were put in place to allow for some of that that grace?
Well, in terms of grading for that last quarter last year, the kids weren't academically penalized. It was really more of a hands-on. We had administration literally going to children's homes, just knocking on the door. Hey, is everything okay? We wanna help. We wanna provide support. I was up. My day started at 8 with my first class, and I wasn't done until 10 o'clock at night answering messages, because you realize that sometimes there's something about the delivery of things that makes it hard to understand. I'm one of those people where for some reason I prefer physical books, for example, and then when you put it on your screen, all of a sudden I can't find anything. So even that, you realize you were spending hours and hours answering questions that were as simple as, where do I find an assignment, to I really don't understand, or I wasn't able to make it to the meeting, but I still want to do the work and I still want to do well. So it was just a greater investment of time. Which I honestly, and I'm convinced that any teacher who is in this for the right reasons was just, you understood that it was necessary, and that especially if the kids are asking for it, how can you not spend those hours giving the kids those little nuggets that they need to feel like they did it, and they didn't let this get the better of them. So it was really more so than any policies or instructions, which just, went to the extent of they're not being penalized academically. It was just understanding that everybody was going to have to put in way more time than we already put in when we're in the building.
And how was, I'm aware that the teachers already work after hours, but how, how did that feel for you? Putting in even more time, and kind of what did you do to help kind of mitigate some of that? Did you make time to do something specific like self-care or anything?
I wish I could say yes to the self-care, but I can't. I'm one of those people that before I was starting my degree, my master's program, I was staying at school till 6 o'clock in the evening. They were calling me, telling me, hey, the building's closing, you need to get out. So I think I was used to putting in those hours. And I genuinely have so much fun with what I do, because the way I see it, if I'm not having fun, they're not having fun, and then why are we here? So it really wasn't a chore. Yes, it wears you down at some point to see the never-ending streams, to wake up every day to 78 emails and 13 messages, but I mean, there were days where things got a little overwhelming, and I had to just take a big breath and go. Grab a cup of coffee or maybe watch an episode of something to get my mind off what was happening. Not even really because of the work, but because it's stressful. Just the general, life-threatening virus is stressful, that by itself. So I think if I had to guess, I don't know, at that point, we would have to see a psychologist about it. But if I had to guess, I really think it was that had me stressed out. Not so much, I love my kids. So I don't know. That's just me. It wasn't a chore for me.
And do you feel like some of the other teachers in your school kind of had a similar mindset of, we just need to kind of get through this for the kids just for until the end of the school year, or did they feel differently during this time?
Being the music teacher can be a little isolating because we don't have that same team, where all the second grade teachers get together and come up with a plan, and all the grade levels do that. So I can't say 100%, but from what I could gather, the teachers with the mindset that I just described were definitely in the majority, and not just in my school. There were a lot of, because you create a network. I'm friends with several music teachers in the county, and you realize that a lot of us really, really rose to the challenge. That's what we decided to do. Yes, there were a few who were overwhelmed, but I also noticed it was older teachers. I think maybe because they were having a hard time with the technology aspect of things, not so much because of the kids or the teaching. I think the technology was very challenging for them, and so they were audibly frustrated. I don't understand. I don't know how to do this. Where do I find things? Where's the things I got lost, but they didn't get lost. They were in a different tab, and so there was a lot of that.
And thinking about this upcoming school year, I'm sure the technology aspect will remain using technology, but and I'm interested in hearing, has the district put out a plan for this upcoming academic school year? Has your school kind of indicated what their plan is? Have you heard from any parents, teachers, maybe their concerns about the upcoming school year?
Yeah, we were fortunate. Our superintendent announced, I want to say it was a week or so ago, that we were starting online. I know there's still a lot of districts that don't know, that are still, on the fence of whether online or in person. So we've had more time to prepare. I'm at a charter school, but for the most part, the charter schools are doing what the district is doing in terms of curriculum, assessment, different things like that. So in that sense, I think we're better prepared for this coming school year. They also made it a point to not move anybody to a different grade level, for example, in terms of the grade level teachers, because we realize teaching online is challenging enough. Might as well ease that part in terms of coming up with activities and assignments and things like that. They already have some experience from the last school year. So as of right now, everybody's staying in the same grade level. I'm the only music teacher in the building, so luckily I still have a job. Because that was also a worry for a while there, is, were there going to be budget cuts? Did that mean that subjects like music, PE, art were going to be canceled? We didn't know. So in that sense, we're grateful. They've provided a lot of professional development opportunities because they realized that last year was challenging because nobody was prepared. Nobody in any field, anywhere in the country was prepared for this because how could we really? So over the summer, they've been sending us a lot of seminars, websites for materials, things like that. I don't necessarily get to benefit from those things because I'm a music teacher, and for the most part, you know, the administration doesn't know how to help the music teacher, the art teacher, the PE teacher. It's a double-edged sword where we're grateful that we get to come up with our own curriculum, but it also means doing it by yourself if you don't have that network. I'm fortunate. I have that network, so we've been giving each other ideas for the last couple of weeks, and we're all feeling much better about this school year, definitely.
And so, I guess, what are some of those new ideas that you have, considering that instruction will remain online, you know, for the time being?
Well, part of what I've been reading, a lot of it, my worry has always been engagement. It's that's something that, in my opinion, proves challenging online. So just reading up on how to make lessons engagement in how to keep lessons engaging. And so a lot of what they talk about are multimedia presentations, making them interactive. So I'm putting together several Google slide presentations for any particular unit or lesson, so that the kids can actually play around with them and have things to click and videos to see and books to read. And I'm really trying to sort of tackle a topic from different points. So for example, the first week back at school, I thought that considering everything that's happening in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, I wanted my first lesson to be on allyship. And so we're tackling that with the story of Ella Fitzgerald and Marilyn Monroe, where Ella, you know, she grows to great heights because of her talent, but at some point she hits that ceiling, that racial ceiling, and Marilyn Monroe uses her white privilege to open a space for Ella in one of the biggest clubs, right? So that she could display that talent that was so obvious, but that people weren't willing to give the opportunity to because of her race. So we're doing that with a book that the kids will be able to read through in class and on their own time, flip through. We're doing that with a recording of Ella performing Lullaby of Birdland live. There's also a written component and a discussion component where we talk about what it means to be an ally, and how we can be allies to others that are experiencing hardship. So that's where I'm going. That's my starting point, and then it's a matter of also finding a way to make the music making component of it. That one we're still figuring out, but there are ideas flowing.
Well, that's really cool. And I think, you know, you brought up kind of one of the other big things happening right now, right? A lot of the social justice movements, like Black Lives Matter. And so one of the concerns that I hear, especially within education, one of the concerns that you hear is trying to facilitate these types of conversations for younger students. And so based off of what you're thinking about, because I think this is a great idea, how would you facilitate those conversations, not only with your students, but you talk about, you work with parents as well a lot because these are younger students.
Well, I've actually been reading Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by, I believe the author's Beverly Daniel Tatum. And she really gears that book toward parents and teachers. So her goal, in my opinion, with that book was to educate the adults on how they can facilitate these conversations with children. So I'm taking that a lot. I'm taking that with me very much so. And part of what she talks about is the creation of a positive racial identity that comes through representation and positive representation, because a lot of times we realize that the only moments that we talk about race are in the context of slavery or the civil rights movement, and generally you see these two distinct roles. And this is something that she brings up. You see the black victim and the white oppressor, and how that doesn't really, that conversation by itself isn't conducive to a positive racial identity. And so part of what that translates to in terms of what I'm doing in class is making sure that the kids feel seen in the material. So that's why, and this is something that I've been doing for a while. And I just, every year you add a new layer because you're still learning. So I'm making it a point to find books where my Black students can see themselves represented, where my Hispanic students can see themselves represented, where my female students can see themselves represented, and realize that there were people that were bound by these racial or gender barriers that broke through them. And I think the more that we talk about that, the more that we instill that in our children. So in terms of the kids are always very receptive. I remember being surprised because we read a book with second grade. The book was based on the song "We Shall Overcome," which was a sort of anthem throughout the civil rights movement. And the plan really was to spend, the book might have taken, I don't know, 10 minutes to read through 15, to do a quick discussion on race, on the people that were helping, on the people that were trying to maintain segregation. The kids spent the entire class trying to understand the historical context of this song, which was mind-boggling to me, that second graders could sit there for an entire hour, because that particular class started with the book, that they were able to sit there for an entire hour and just question after question. But why did people feel this way? And how did they do that? But what do you mean with this? Things like that. So the kids are ready for those conversations, certainly. And I'm lucky enough that the parents are supportive, because another big thing that I try to incorporate with my curriculum is world music, particularly Jewish music. We try to explore the cultural context of Jewish songs. And I've gotten emails from parents saying, "Oh, my child is so excited. They showed me the song. It's beautiful. Thank you for making it fun." Which I understand where they're coming from, where fun is engaging and things like that. But also you realize that they called or they wrote because they see value in that. They see value in exploring music from different time periods, from different cultures, from different racial and ethnic groups, and I'm very, very fortunate that my community has been receptive to what I'm trying to do with the kids.
That's great. And I know, you talked about not really leaving your house, but have you, aside from obviously this type of work, which, is still activism, but have you participated in any of the like recent like Black Lives Matter protests in Miami, or any other type of activism type work outside of, what you already do in the classroom?
I honestly haven't. In terms of being there physically at the protests, and one reason being my mom's health condition. She's struggling with an autoimmune disease, and so she's part of that at-risk group. And the other part of me, and I'll be completely honest and candid with you, it we've seen those people, and they're always the minority, the few that go to a protest, and the protest is for a righteous cause and it's for a just cause, and there are people that just seek to aggravate or to escalate things, whether it's with police or through vandalism. And those people that aren't with the cause of racial equality and battling racial injustice, honestly, they scare me. They scare me because you're at a peaceful protest and everybody has a north, and then everybody's there for a purpose, and then those people end up making what was supposed to be something that was supposed to be peaceful violent. And so I'll be completely candid. I could tell you that it was, oh no, my part is in the classroom. I'll be completely candid with you. Those people scare me. That small group scares me, and they scare me because it's something that happens in Venezuela all the time, where you have these peaceful protests against government repression, and Venezuela has a long history of protests. It's very much ingrained in the culture, the marching for a cause, and then the government sends in their own to disrupt, to break car windows, to start fights, staged fights with the military. And next thing you know, the crowd of peaceful protesters is being tear gassed, is being shot at, is being arrested. And I think having seen that in Venezuela makes me fearful of that happening here, especially given the political climate surrounding Black Lives Matter protests, which there shouldn't be. There shouldn't be a political climate because the topic isn't political. The topic is social. But unfortunately, and maybe history will prove me wrong, that's what the administration has done. It's turned a social cause political. And that's unfortunate, to say the least.
Yeah. So the stories that you kind of were mentioning as it relates to what, has transpired with some of the protests, I know you didn't participate in person, but did you hear like, these anecdotes like from friends that had gone, or like other folks that had gone in person, specifically like in Miami?
There was one particular friend, not in Miami, he's in Portland, and he's been very vocal about the protests. He's been attending protests regularly, and he's been talking about how things are peaceful until police presence arrives, and then inevitably you have antagonizers, for lack of a better word, and all of a sudden, there's a use of an unnecessary use of force. And I understand that being an officer is an extremely challenging job, and I understand that you're in a position where very few can understand your frame of mind, and unfortunately that results in, best case scenario, arrest first, ask questions later. Worst case scenario, shoot first, ask questions later. And that's something that has been going around through media sources, because you can't always see what people post from personal accounts and understand the context. So when you look at outlets like, for example, Now This, they've been covering the protests extensively. You see reporters getting targeted, and you see them getting targeted deliberately. You know, it's not that they were confused for antagonizers. It's not that they were confused for people who were vandalizing properties. They were reporters with cameras, with microphones, and they were shot at with rubber bullets at close range. And so all of that is just very, just, I don't know what the word is. It's frightening. It makes you freeze, and it gives you chills thinking that's how this is being handled.
And you brought up kind of the politicizing of these social movements, and if you can, you share your thoughts on the way in which this administration has responded to these social movements, as well as just the responses of for COVID-19 as well.
Well, in terms of these social movements, I think there's language being used, and it's being used deliberately to make villains out of protesters, in which you see this administration, whether it's from the president or from the press secretary or whoever it might be, using words like thugs, and using language like standing by the police, making those two things at odds with each other. Like, if you support this social cause, then you don't respect law enforcement, and things like that. And while there might be some people that feel that way, I don't consider it to be the majority, and I definitely don't consider it to be helpful, because I don't think that one thing negates the other. I don't think that because you respect law enforcement, that has to mean that you can't also understand that they're doing wrong by these communities, by Black communities and Hispanic communities. It's almost like having a child, that you have your kid and you love them and you would go through hell and high water for them, but the moment they're going down the wrong path, you do the best you can to correct it. And that should be our response to anything that involves people, because it's human nature, right? It's human nature, and you have that added layer of systems in place that aren't conducive to justice. In my opinion, they're not conducive to justice, and that doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. But if this administration seeks to continue that rhetoric of this being about disrespecting law enforcement, or this being about disrespecting monuments, or about disrespecting buildings and property, you're saying that those things are valuable, and that the thousands of people killed by police brutality are not. That's what that communicates to for me. Now, in terms of their response to the pandemic, I just starting with the fact that it took this long, it took as long as it did to admit that it was a threat. Like step one, it took them until March to admit that this was a serious threat. When there was news of this virus back in late November, if I'm not mistaken, going on to the lack of leadership in terms of providing instructions, on the federal level, providing instructions to the states as to what should be done. Because ultimately, I'm sure that none of these governors have degrees in infectious diseases. I'm almost positive about this. If there is one, I apologize, but they got into it to legislate. And it's understandable that they wouldn't know how to deal with something as unprecedented as this. The fact that there were politicians across the aisle, if I'm not mistaken, unloading stock before the announcement was made. The fact that we were in this pandemic, and again, with the rhetoric, you have a president throwing fuel to a fire of people protesting to open up the economy without any regard for the lives that are being risked. Talking about what was that big phrase of his, that the cure can't be worse than the disease, is, I believe, the logic he used to justify why we couldn't shut down stores and malls and things like that the cure couldn't be worse than the disease, which is just, it's ridiculous. Because as, and I wanna be sensitive about this, as challenging as unemployment is, and and again, this is coming from somebody who is privileged enough to keep working through this pandemic. If my circumstances were otherwise, maybe I'd have a different perspective. But poverty is, to me, not comparable to death. Poverty is something that can be remedied, not easily, but it can be. And businesses can find ways to reopen, and not easily, but they can be. And death is not something that can be remedied. Once we lose thousands of people like we have, those people are dead, and they're dead forever, because we couldn't come together, for a couple of months to battle this and do things the right way, quarantining, masks. Another point of criticism is that something as simple and unpolitical as wearing a piece of cloth on your face to prevent you from spitting your germs at other people, even that became political, where you were only true to the president and his idea, because another big phrase of the party right now is to not be a sheep. That if you wore a mask, you were considered a sheep. And you have to sit there and wonder, and that's another part of what has made these circumstances even more stressful than they should be, is that how are we here? How is it 2020, and we have people seriously debating the information coming from trained professionals, because our administration has made knowledge the enemy. Scientists, reporters. And so now you have his flock who anything that is contrary to what the president says, they must be making it up. And apparently the entire world is in on this plan to simply make him look bad. And if we don't want to be sheep, then we don't acknowledge that the virus is real. We don't acknowledge that it is a threat. We do not wear masks. And it's frightening. It's frustrating. And just taking deep breaths. Taking deep breaths.
And you mentioned in your response kind of the uncertainty as it relates to, like, you know, the state's response and the connection, and the governors, and if you can kind of share, you know, since you're in Miami, in Florida, if you can share, you know, your specific thoughts on the responses, the policies, procedures that have been put in place or have not been put in place in Florida by the specific administration in Florida.
Well, our governor was one of those people that took too long to acknowledge that this was coming, and took too long to acknowledge the severity of what was coming. So we did good by closing schools down when we did. I think that might have likely saved a lot of lives in terms of students and adult faculty and their families. Because people talk about students and teachers, they don't talk about the people working in the cafeteria. They don't talk about the custodians or the security guards. So I think that we did well in terms of closing the schools down when we did. But maybe it's political, maybe it's cultural, maybe it's a combination of the two. People here in South Florida, I don't think they understood what quarantining meant. And so smack dab at the beginning, you know, we're in the middle of this, everybody's been sent home, businesses are closing, you still had people going to family gatherings and things like that. And I don't know if it's because there wasn't a way, because there was a curfew set in place, but other than the curfew, which wasn't strictly enforced from what I understand, everything else was suggestion. And I understand that there are some things that are hard to enforce. How are you going to go around house to house and make sure that there aren't more than 10 people and make sure that they're maintaining 6 feet of distance? So there was a level of faith that officials had to have in terms of their community. And it seems like a lot of people just didn't bother. So all of these suggestions of social distancing and limiting the number of people in a given space and things like that were taken very, very lightly by a lot of people, if at all. The masks should have been mandated earlier. They weren't. It was originally a suggestion. And things like that. I mean, businesses were closed for a time to prevent the spread. But again, businesses opened to what a lot of people, myself included, feel prematurely. And again, I understand that people need to get back to work, but you also perhaps have to look at you know, is a mall essential? Is a gym essential? Are bars essential. I had a friend that lives near downtown, and he would drive home and the bars were packed with people with no masks, indoors when the mandate was to maintain the indoor areas closed. So I think they're trying to enforce that a little better now. I know that they do have police making rounds at hot spots, social hot spots like Miami Beach and Wynwood and things like that. And there are businesses being fined and closed if they're not abiding by the mandates. But it's just all felt very like standing on sand, not particularly stable. It seems that the trickle down mentality is it's up to you. And so the federal government tells the governors it's up to you, and the governors tell the mayors it's up to you, and the mayors tell the superintendent of schools it's up to you. And so that just doesn't seem like it would be conducive to successfully stopping or what they were at some point, talking about flattening the curve.
And so you talked about the masks being mandated now, and now, police are doing a little bit more in terms of observing the hot spots. So I guess what is the specific mask mandate now? Because I know in South Florida, there's like a very like structured, like from my understanding, it's like you have like warnings, right? You have different, so if you can share more about that, because I haven't seen that really anywhere else.
Yeah, most businesses have signs at the door that say you must be wearing a mask. There are actually businesses that have their door locked just in case there are people that refuse. So for example, I had to get my eyes checked, and the optometrist office had their door locked. To make sure that they abided by the number of people, that they didn't exceed the number of people allowed, and B, to be able to monitor the mask situation. Because I do remember when I went for my appointment, somebody actually, I guess, forgot their mask or didn't bother bringing it, I don't know, and they were turned away. So you have that. I know that businesses, particularly at the checkout lines where people tend to congregate, they have the 6 feet markers to ensure the social distancing. And fortunately, where I am, which is specifically the Kendall area, everybody's been very responsible. I have not yet seen somebody walk into a store without a mask, because on occasion we had to go get medication, or we ran out of food and we didn't realize it and we had to buy something to make dinner. And so in our area, people have been very, very responsible with that. And from what I understand, a lot of stores at the national level are mandating masks now. So the most recent one I can remember is Walmart and Costco. Those are only 2 of the more recent examples I can remember. So all of their stores are mandating masks, where apparently at some point, again, it was left to the state or to the district or to the county. So that's been an improvement.
And then I guess for the folks that maybe are not as familiar with the geographics of South Florida, kind of in relation to the rest of what folks maybe consider as Miami, like where would you situate Kendall? Because you talk about how kind of Kendall is their reaction and actions have been different to what people maybe are considering like more of the hot spots, like maybe Miami Beach. So if you can maybe kind of share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, Miami is this weird phenomenon where everything's called Miami, but then they're like Kendall, I guess you could consider them like boroughs, I guess, if you had to find an equivalent. So Kendall is a very residential area, um, predominantly Hispanic, I would say middle class families, but it's mostly residential versus Miami Beach, which, you know, having the beach so close is a big social spot. You know, lots of restaurants, lots of bars and clubs, um, lots of tourists. Unfortunately, we had an enormous influx of tourists from up north, and I mean states, who came for spring break in the middle of a pandemic. And so there was a considerable spike in cases because of that, because Miami Beach is such a touristy area. Very, I guess you would call it metropolitan, high rises and things like that.
Thank you. So I want to be respectful of your time, but I wanted to conclude with having you, share with me anything else about your experiences with COVID-19 that I've not asked yet.
Really, in terms of my experience with COVID, I just consider myself fortunate, because so many people are struggling in very, very real ways right now. I've just been fortunate. That's really the word I would use to describe my experience, because I have been able to keep my job, and I have been able to keep food on the table and a roof over my head. I've been able to keep in contact with family. You know, we still have areas of South Florida, particularly in the Homestead area, so further south from where I am, where there are people who don't have internet, who can't afford internet, and that, I'm sure, translates to a loss of connection with their family members, with school, and an ability to work from home. And so I've been extremely, extremely fortunate right now, and just trying to be responsible and understanding that even if I'm not at risk to die from COVID, because by all accounts, a healthy 28-year-old, if a healthy 28-year-old were to contract it, you know, you'd most likely survive. Still thinking about the people that wouldn't, thinking about not only my mom, but other people who are immunocompromised, thinking about not only my in-laws, but other elderly people, even people who simply can't afford healthcare. You know, there are healthy people who would be stuck in crippling debt if they were to get sick. So sure, they'd survive, but they'd be paying hospital bills for the rest of their lives, because they can't afford good health insurance, because they can't they don't have the means to make the minimum co-payments and things like that. So really, I guess I'm just trying to keep that at the forefront, especially in terms of trying to maintain some sort of peace of mind. I think that's also helped me not despair. So yeah, I really just making the most out of terrible circumstances in terms of, you know, COVID, and hoping to pass that on to my students to some extent, you know, hoping to give them a breath of fresh air, and look at some music and I don't know, maybe give them something a tool to cope with all of this.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share stories and thoughts, feelings, and experiences with me. And we really appreciate your perspective.
Thank you for having me.